Hey there, YouTube land! Before I get into the video, let me remind you, if you like my videos, hit that like and subscribe button. And if you feel the need to support me, hit me up on my Patreon at patreon.com/uncommonramen, capital U, capital R. I do all of this in my free time, so any amount of support can help me bring more of this content to you more often. Alright, today we are taking a look at Atla Palani, Nest Tender. This is a deck tech I did, partially because I didn't even realize that Atla Palani was precon at some point. Was Atla Palani a precon? Can somebody tell me that? Because I'm pretty sure Atla Palani was a precon at some point. There's no reason why she would be a foil. But I don't know. I didn't know Atla Palani was a precon. So I started building this deck because I thought the idea was really interesting. The whole green egg thing, and then the egg popping into something. The ability for that to just turn into massive beaters, just cheat in some massive beaters. So to start off, I will say that originally when I built this deck, it was the nastiest, horriblest, worst beaters ever imagined, like Avacyn and Gisela and, you know, Giant Ataphage and, you know, Impervious Great Worm, all the horrible beaters of beatdom, I guess. The ones that really just destroyed people. And it had a lot of sack outlets too. I think I had 6 different sack outlets in here, and it was kind of very consistent, and people stopped playing against it. They stopped wanting to play against it, so I had to revamp it. I decided to play it down a little bit, partially also because I just wanted to change it to this. So we're going Dinosaur Tribal with this. We're also exploring the I believe it's called the Enrage trigger. So we're going dinos, and we're going to try and abuse the Enrage trigger, although it is a little bit harder than it seems. Anyway, you'll see. So Atla Palani, Nest Tender. This is a Naya build, so 1 red, 1 white, 1 green, and 1 generic. You get this 2/3 body, and for 2 you can tap it to create a 0/1 egg creature token with Defender. However, when an egg you control dies, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest of them on the bottom of your library in a random order. So we're essentially going to cheat out big, horrible creatures. This is one of those decks that's almost immune to board wipes, because board wipes are almost always worse for your opponent in this case. But we'll go through it and show you. There are dinosaur creatures in here, and there are very good reason for those, and I'll explain them as I come to them. So first off, we're going to take a look at creatures. There are a lot of creatures in here. Okay. All right, for starters, we have Aggressive Mammoth, and I know, it's not a dinosaur, right? Aggressive Mammoth is 3 and 3 green for an 8/8 trample. Other creatures you control have trample. The first iteration of the dinosaur build, one of the biggest things that I found myself running into was I didn't have a lot in the way of trample, and it made it really difficult to connect with my opponents. So this remedies the situation in some way, shape, or form, and it only costs 6 to cast it, so if it does manage to get trapped in your hand, there is still a way to cast it. Next up, we have Apex Altasaur. This guy is 7 and 2 green for a 10/10. When it enters the battlefield, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control, and it has Enrage. Whenever Apex Altasaur is dealt damage, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. This is a kind of board wipe in a sense. It will wreck itself in the process, but it will probably take down 4 or 5 different creatures in the process as well. Because its Enrage trigger is going to happen every time it fights something. So the first time it ETBs, it's going to fight something, and then it's going to fight something, and then it's going to fight something, and it's going to keep fighting things until it dies. So either, or, you know, your opponents run out of creatures, and it just happens to live, which is few and far between. But Apex Altasaur, what a mean little Enrage trigger that guy has. Next up, we have Blast Furnace Hellkite. This is 7 and 2 red for a 5/5. This is Artifact, Offering, Flying, and Double Strike, and creatures your opponents have, or attacking your opponents have Double Strike. So, again, this is not a dinosaur. This is in here because the dinosaur that gives dinosaurs Double Strike is really kind of squishy. So this was a little bit more. Well, it wasn't just that it was squishy. This also says creatures attacking your opponents have double strike. That means that it incentivizes your opponents to attack each other because it gives their creatures double strike when attacking each other. And so it's kind of a political piece as well. I just really like this one over the white dinosaur that does the same thing except just gives double strike to your stuff. Next up, we have Burning Sun's Avatar. This guy is 3 and 3 red for a 6/6. When Burning Sun's Avatar enters the battlefield, it deals 3 damage to target opponent and 3 damage to up to 1 target creature. It's just a really nice dinosaur. Really cool trigger. Easy to cheat in. Easy to play. Good dinosaur. Next up, we have Dragon Egg. So we're going to run 2 different egg type creatures in here. Dragon Egg and Rock Egg. Just because, again, we're not only going to get the trigger from the egg, but we're also going to get the trigger from the card itself. So we get a little bit of extra value out of this. And a 2/2 flying Fire Breather is still pretty good considering the evasion of flying. It's 2 and a red for a 0/2 defender. And when it dies, you get to create a 2/2 red dragon creature token with flying that has fire breathing. Next up, we have Atla Primal Conqueror, 5 and 2 red for a 7/7. This guy has trample, and when it enters the battlefield, each player exiles the top card or exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card. You may cast any number of the spells among the non-land cards exiled this way without paying their mana costs. It transforms for 9 and a green, Phyrexian green mana into an 11/11, and I'll show you what that guy is. It's basically a Blightsteel Colossus in a sense. It is Atla Primal Sickness. It's an 11/11 trample indestructible. Whenever Atla Primal Sickness deals combat damage to a player, they get that many poison counters. So obviously this is in here because not only is it a beater on ETB, 7/7 that lets you play spells for free as soon as it ETBs, but it transforms into an even worse nightmare for your opponents. So it's one of those things your opponents have to answer pretty quickly. Next up, we have Atla Primal Storm, his younger self. This is 4 and 2 red for a 6/6. When Atla Primal Storm attacks, exile top card of each player's library. You may cast any number of those spells without paying their mana cost. Again, really good value here, and it forces your opponents to deal with it because otherwise you just end up playing their deck for them. Next up, we have Galta and Mavrin. This is 3, 2 green and 2 white for a 12/12 trample. When you attack, you get to choose one. You either get to create an attacking XX green dinosaur creature token with trample, where X is the greatest power among other attacking creatures you control, or just other attacking creature. Well, it's your turn anyway, so. Or you get to create X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is the number of attacking creatures. So if you're swinging with a lot of creatures, you can create even more creatures. Or if you're swinging with really big creatures, you get to create a bunch of little, or not little dinosaurs, a bunch of dinosaurs that match its power. I love this card. This card can really make the game very tight for people. And obviously, in this kind of a deck, we're going to go for the green dinosaur, but there is still opportunity for the vampire tokens. Next up, we have Galta Primal Hunger. This guy is 10 and 2 green for a 12/12 trample, and I did forget what its other text was, so you'll have to forgive me here. I'm going to flip this guy around. It says, this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control. So this guy essentially could become just 2 green. Especially in this deck, it's really easy. So if it gets into your hand, this isn't super hard to cast. However, if you cheat into it, it still doesn't feel bad because you still get a 12/12 with trample. So Galta Primal Hunger. Next up, we have Jizath or Gizath. I don't know how people want to pronounce that, but Jizath, Sun's Avatar. 5, a red, a green, and a white for a 7/6 trample vigilance. Whenever Jizath, Sun's Avatar, deals combat damage to a player, reveal that many cards from the top of your library. Put any number of dinosaur creature cards from among them onto the battlefield and the rest onto the bottom of your library in a random order. So this is the biggest reason why I wanted to turn this into a dinosaur deck, because this was in my list for just big stomp big beater stompers, because it is a 7/6 with trample, vigilance, and haste. But upon activating its ability in the stompy good stuff deck, I almost always whiffed with it. And so when it came to the point of getting an opportunity to revamp the deck in a way that would be a little bit downplayed, if you will, this became a really cool concept to me. Okay, next up we have Harmonic Prodigy. This is 1 in a red, also not a dinosaur, 1/3 with prowess. If an ability is shaman or wizard you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. So this is really cool because Atla Palani is a shaman. So the egg trigger will happen twice. So if an egg dies, you're not just going to search for one. We're going to get 2 different big beaters out of it just because of this. And it makes this card really threatening. So Harmonic Prodigy in this deck is some work. Next up, we have Marauding Raptor. This is possibly the smallest dinosaur in the deck, but it's also a dinosaur that does a lot of work. Marauding Raptor is 1 in red. Creature spells you control you cast cost 1 less to cast. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Marauding Raptor deals 2 damage to it. If a dinosaur is dealt damage this way, Marauding Raptor gets +2/+0. So he buffs himself by dealing damage to dinosaurs. But more importantly, he's going to hit those enraged triggers as the ETB. So the first one we saw was Apex Altasaur, and obviously the enraged trigger on that one already procs itself, but this allows for the trigger to happen for each thing that enters the battlefield as long as Marauding Raptor is in play. It does do 2 damage. That's a lot of damage in my opinion, but with the toughness on some of these creatures, it's kind of negligible, but we'll see where it kind of gets scary. But Marauding Raptor, I think this does a lot of work in the deck. Next up, we have Nesting Dragon, 3 and 2 red for a 5/4 dragon with flying. Obviously, this is in here because on landfall it creates eggs, so we're going to try and get as many eggs in play as possible, either through Atla Palani triggers or through Nesting Dragon triggers, or just by playing eggs. I want to put as many eggs on the table as possible because I want to make it really hard for my opponents to swing into me. Also, I want to make it really hard for my opponents to do board wipes. They're going to have to prioritize killing Atla first. So on landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a 0/2 red dragon egg creature token with defender. And when this creature dies, you get to put a 2/2 red dragon creature token with flying into the battlefield that has fire breathing. So it's the same thing as Dragon Egg, except that it is created. It creates a token version of it. And that's really awesome. And there's other reasons why that could be really awesome in the deck, and we'll get there as we get there. Next up, we have Polyraptor. This is amongst the suite of enraged dinosaurs in here. This guy is 6 and 2 green for a 5/5 enrage. Whenever Polyraptor is dealt damage, create a token that is a copy of Polyraptor. So this is really interesting. Because all the tokens are also going to have the enraged trigger, and when they ETB, Marauding Raptor, I believe Marauding Raptor doesn't look for cast, I believe it looks for ETB, so let me just double check that so I'm not just giving the wrong information here. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield. So essentially you could get basically a ton, infinite Marauding Raptor triggers, and then Marauding Raptor himself gets massive, and if you have some way to give him trample, all of a sudden he becomes a huge problem, not to mention your huge army of Polyraptors. I don't know, I think Polyraptor is incredible. Polyraptor is expensive for a reason, obviously. He's a very good card, but that was only half the reason I put this in here. It's just a good card in general. If you block, you get an extra Polyraptor. Then you have 2 blockers that create extra Polyraptors. It's a stupid card. Next up, we have Quartzwood Crasher. This guy is 2 red and a green for a 6/6 trample. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control with trample deal combat damage to a player, you get to create an XX green dinosaur beast creature token with trample, where X is the amount of damage those creatures dealt to that player. This gets really out of hand, and you'll notice that a lot of these are really threatening, that force your opponents to do something about them. That's kind of the point, is that I want to keep them constantly working to try and keep the board clear, because the quicker they run out of resources, the faster you can just overwhelm the board and win. And this is just one of those things. Every time anything deals or trample damage, you're going to create a dinosaur with a huge amount of power and toughness that also has trample. Next up, we have Ripjaw Raptor. This is 2 and 2 green for a 4/5. Its Enrage trigger allows you to draw a card. So this one's just good for value in general. It's not in here to be a big menacing beastie of a dinosaur. It's literally in here to help me draw cards. I have run into this issue where card draw is really necessary in this deck. And you don't want to draw too many cards, obviously, because you don't want to draw all the cards that you need the eggs to dump into, but you still need to draw cards, so you still need to get answers. Ripjaw Raptor is a good way of doing that. Next up, we have Rock Egg. Like I said, we have all the eggs in here. Well, I guess that's not true. There's probably some eggs we're missing. These are the only 2 eggs we have in here. For 2 and a white, you get a Defender. 0/3 Defender. When Rock Egg dies, you get a 3/3 white bird creature token with flying. So it's evasive when it dies. When it dies, you're probably going to get the Atla trigger. So there's really no downside to that. Next up, we have Seedborn Muse. Seedborn Muse is just good in this because, first off, we're going to be aggressive. We're going to turn sideways as often as we possibly can. And secondly, Atla Palani taps to do her egg thing. So this allows us to do the egg trigger or the egg activated ability every single turn. So we're going to be attacking, but we're always going to have blockers, and we're also going to be creating eggs like crazy. It's going to make your opponents have to work really hard for victory. Next up, we have Silverclad Ferocidons. This guy is 5 and 2 red for an 8/5. Enrage. When Silverclad Ferocidons is dealt damage, each opponent sacrifices a permanent. I don't have to tell you the value that has when it comes into play with a Marauding Raptor in play, because it's just immediate sacrifice. But then anytime it's blocked, anytime it blocks, your opponents are going to be forced to have to block it with something that kills it immediately so that they can sacrifice as few permanents as possible. It doesn't say non-land permanents, so your opponents can sacrifice lands, which I think is a really cool thing for this. Next up, we have Temple Altasaur. This guy is 4 and a white for a 3/4. If a source would deal damage to another dinosaur you control, prevent all but one of that damage. So originally, I put this in here to help bring down the amount of damage that Marauding Raptor does, because 2 damage, in my opinion, is a lot of damage. That puts a lot of these dinosaurs within bolt range. So this would bring it down to 1 damage. But also, it just in general brings a lot of the damage that's being dealt to the dinosaurs down to 1. Which means that you have to kill the Altasaur before you kill anything else if you're doing damage to it. And I thought that was such an interesting way to put a lot of pressure on your opponents. It is 5 for a 3/4. Next up, we have Terror of the Peaks. This is 3 and 2 red for a 5/4 dragon, another non-dinosaur, but for obvious reasons it's in here. Flying. Spells your opponents cast to target Terror of the Peaks cost an additional 3 life to cast. And whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. This is disgusting to have in here. A large portion of these creatures have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 power, and that's good enough to almost kill anything. Not to mention the amount of damage that can be pointed at someone's face and really cause issues. Terror of the Peaks, really great card. Next up, we have the Tarrasque. This guy is 6 and 3 green for a 10/10. The Tarrasque has haste and ward 10 as long as it was cast, which it won't have. Whenever the Tarrasque attacks, it fights target creature defending player controls. So it just comes in as a big beefy 10/10, and then on attack it's just going to fight something and possibly make it hard, if not impossible, to block. And yeah, it's a dinosaur, so that's really cool. Next up, we have Thrasta, Tempest Roar, 10 and 2 green for a 7/7. It costs 3 less for each spell you cast this turn. It has Trample Haste and Trample over Planeswalkers. And Thrasta, Tempest Roar, has Hexproof as long as it entered the battlefield this turn. It's not the biggest dinosaur in the world, but it has Trample just on its card, so that's great. It has Haste. It tramples over Planeswalkers, so we can get some fun value out of hitting Planeswalkers and then still hitting our opponents. And it has hexproof on the turn that it comes into play. So, yeah, your opponents have to wait to kill it. I like it. I think it's cool. Next up, we have Trapjaw Tyrant. This is one of those that I was really excited to try and play with to see how the enrage triggers would work. This is 3 and 2 white for a 5/5 enrage. Whenever Trapjaw Tyrant is dealt dealt damage, exile target creature an opponent controls until Trapjaw Tyrant leaves the battlefield. So you get their biggest threats and then force them to answer it because they have to. Otherwise, they just don't get their biggest threats back. And then it has an immediate enrage trigger as soon as it comes in if a Marauding Raptor is on the table. And then it does that same trigger anytime it blocks or becomes blocked. I mean, come on. That's so cool. Also, it probably will get killed really quickly. Yes, we have a Tyrannax Rex in here. 4 and 3 green for an 8/8. This spell cannot be countered. It has Trample, Ward 4, and Haste, and it has Toxic 4. I didn't want to go the Toxic route here, but I did want to go the you have to deal with everything in this deck. There is nothing here that isn't going to destroy you, and force my opponents to really run out of answers. And Tyrannax Rex, you have to, at some point in time, you're going to have a field of 3, 4 of these dinosaurs, and you're going to have to decide which one is the worst threat, because they all are bad. And the Toxic 4 on this, the Ward 4 on this, the Trample on this, I mean, come on. It's so good. Then we got Verdant Sun's Avatar, just to add to the insult here, for 5 and 2 green. This guy is a 5/5. When Verdant Sun's Avatar or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness. So, 12/12 on the Galtas. We've got a 7/7. We've got Atali turns into an 11/11. We got, tons of power and or just tons of toughness here. That's a lot of life gain. So if you really are getting beat up, which you probably are going to get beat up, here's a good way of bolstering your life total. And it's a dinosaur. Next up, we got Zakama, Primal Calamity. This guy is 6 a red, a green, and a white for a 9/9 Vigilance Reach Trample. I mean, Vigilance Reach Trample is so good. When Zakama, Primal Calamity enters the battlefield, if you cast it, untap all land you control. You're going to miss that trigger almost all the time. I don't ever cast that from my hand, I don't think. For 2 and a red, Zakama deals 3 damage to target creature. For 2 and a green, destroy target artifact or enchantment. And for 2 and a white, you gain 3 life. If this gets on the field, it's going to be very problematic for your opponents. Dealing 3 damage to creatures is a good way of getting rid of small death touchers or just in general small creatures that are probably going to pose you a problem. Destroying target artifact enchantment gets rid of stacks pieces, and just really good enchantments and artifacts. Let's just talk about that. Just a really good card. And then finally we have Zatalpa, Primal Dawn, 6 and 2 white for a 4/8 flying, double strike, vigilance, trample, indestructible. It's indestructible, it's got flying, and it's got double strike. This guy's a menace, because it's going to swing in for 8 damage every time it swings, if not more. I mean, it really depends. So, super good. And it's a dino, so come on. Also, Ixalan, was the Lost Caverns of Ixalan's coming out at some point. I mean, talk about the new dinosaurs that are coming in there. All right, next up is Instance. We got Beast Within. This one's obvious. 3 for a removal spell. It's target permanent. Doesn't say target creature. Gives them a 3/3 beast in replacement that's vanilla. We got Boros Charm, red white. You get to choose one to either deal 4 damage to target player or planeswalker. Permanents you control gain indestructible until end of turn, and target creature gains double strike until end of turn. This is really cool because the permanents get indestructible until end of turn. It's basically Heroic Intervention, but in red white. So it saves your board if you really just want to stick your board. But also that double strike trigger is kind of cool. Next up, we got Generous Gift. It's the same thing as Beast Within, except they get a green elephant token, and it's in white for some reason, but it's still just target permanent. We got Heroic Intervention for the same reason we have Boros Charm. Permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. I like the hexproof again because if we're looking at just getting targeted, we could stop that. Next, we got Path to Exile because, I mean, why not? Remove target creature. They get to search the library for a land and put it into play tapped. Pretty good. All right, next up we have Rootborn Defenses for 2 and a white. Populate. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. I'm sure you're sensing a pattern here. We don't want our big dinos to die. Also, we get the populate trigger, so we get a little egg. And yes, this does save our eggs from being destroyed, but I did mention we have sack outlets in here, so it's not always the end of the day. We have Sundering Growth. This is hybrid green-green or white-white or green-white. Destroy target artifact or enchantment, then populate. So we get an egg, and we also get to destroy an artifact or enchantment. It only costs 2 to cast this, which I think is awesome. That's really good mana value. All right, we got Swords to Plowshares. For obvious reasons, 1 white, exile target creature. The controller gains life equal to its power. We're running beaters, so I don't care how much life you gain. You're probably still going to feel this at the end of the day. Next up is Sorceries. There were only 8. 8 sorceries, 8 instants. There was no need for more. We are running board wipes in here. There's a couple reasons we run board wipes in here. We still get value out of them if our board is just eggs and our opponents are playing super conservatively. We also, if we are in a position where our opponents are just checking us at every stop and we just don't have value in creatures in play, well, we have board wipes to help keep ourselves alive till we can get a footing in the game. So Blasphemous Act, costs 1 less for each creature on the battlefield, deals 13 damage to each creature. We got Cultivate. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. Put one of those cards into play. One into play tapped, 1 into your hand, and shuffle your library. We got Farseek. Search your library for a Plains, Island, Swamp, or Mountain card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. We got Kodama's Reach. Same thing as Cultivate. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. Put 1 onto the battlefield tapped, 1 into your hand, and then shuffle. We got Nature's Lore. Search your library for a Force card. Put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle. We got Rampant Growth. Search your library for a basic land card. Put that card onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. We got 3 Visits. Search your library for a Force card. Put that onto the battlefield, then shuffle. And then we got Vanquish the Horde. 6 and 2 white. This spell costs 1 less for each creature on the battlefield. Destroy all creatures. It's just another Blasphemous Act, except obviously a little bit better and costs 1 more. Next up are artifacts. All right, starting with Arcane Signet. I mean, it's 3-color deck. You have to have the Arcane Signet. Got the Ashnod's Altar. This is one of our sack outlets. For 3, you can sacrifice a creature. 3 to put into play. Sacrifice a creature, add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. So we're going to sacrifice our eggs because we're going to inevitably get caught with some of these big dinos in our hands. And we don't want them in our hand. We want them in play. So you sacrifice a couple eggs, you get a bunch of triggers off the eggs, then you get that big dinosaur in play, and all of a sudden, you know, the field looks really bad for your opponents. We got Gruul Signet. It's a filter for red-green. We got Lightning Greaves because Atla Palani is a target. And actually, really, let's be honest, any of the dinosaurs are a target. This guy equips for free, so you're just swapping it around to give haste and hexproof, Shroud, depending on which creature you want living. Shroud is so good. All right, we got Maskwood Nexus for obvious reasons. Maskwood Nexus not only creates a bunch of shapeshifters with Changeling, so those are eggs, but it turns literally every creature in your deck into eggs. So Atla will see any creature die at that point, and now anything that dies replaces itself. I mean, that is insane value. And of course, you know, you could just run through your deck, but hey, I haven't gotten to that point yet, so we'll see how that works out. Maskwood Nexus, MVP. We got Selesnya Signet, filter for green-white. We got Skull Clamp. It's another sack outlet for your eggs. It kills the egg. It kills Atla's egg, anyway. I think it kills all the eggs. No, it just kills Atla's egg. It kills Atla's egg. It allows you to draw 2 cards. You get the Atla trigger. There's just nothing but value. And it only costs 1 to do that. So it's a really good sack outlet, personally. All right, next up, Soul Ring. Mana positive, can't go wrong with that. Swiftfoot Boots for the same reason we got the Lightning Greaves. Again, you got targets on the table. This is a great way to help mitigate the removal spells there because they have to target the boots first. We got Thornbite Staff because, ouch. Thornbite Staff is 2 to play. Equipped creature has tap 2, tap. This creature deals 1 damage to target creature or player. And whenever a creature is put into a graveyard from play, untap this creature. Whenever a shaman creature comes into play, you may attach Thornbite Staff to it, and it equips for 4. So Atla is always going to automatically equip this as soon as she comes into play. You can use the ability to kill an egg and then turn around and just repopulate that egg. And then if you can find a way to untap her again, say with a Seedborn Muse, then you can just do it again. It's kind of gross. I realize how stupid that sounds, but it's so fun. You have to play the deck to really understand how fun that is. But also you'll lose friends fast. Next up, we have Defense of the Heart. This is just a dang good enchantment. During your upkeep, if one of your opponents controls 3 or more creatures, sacrifice Defense of the Heart, search your library for up to 2 creature cards, put those creatures into play, and then shuffle your library afterwards. So this deck is kind of expensive, and so sometimes you brick on lands. This is a good way to kind of defend yourself when the going gets rough. This guy will sacrifice himself if your opponents, and I think it's one of your opponents, ends up having 3 or more creatures. Token-based decks generate that pretty quickly, and then all of a sudden you populate the board with 2 fun little beaters that probably keep you defended for at least long enough to get yourself back into the game. We got Determined Iteration, another really fun card in here. This is kind of a sack outlet, but really not. It says at the beginning of combat on your turn, populate. Then the token created this way gains haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of your next end step. We don't care that it gains haste because what we're populating is the eggs, and then we're sacrificing the eggs at the end of the turn, which Atla Palani will see and then create a huge dinosaur in its place. This was cheeky tech. I was looking through lists, and a lot of lists were running this, and then I read the card and I was like, oh yeah, this is good. So Determined Iteration. If you're running Atla Palani, you should probably run this card because it's really good. Next up, we have Elemental Bond. Whenever a creature with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you get to draw a card. Everything in here has power 3 or greater, except for maybe like 4 creatures. Next up, we got Fanatical Devotion. 2 and a white, sacrifice a creature, regenerate target creature. I love this card because it's a sack outlet, but it also has some extra value to it. We can sack an egg to save a creature that we actually need on the table. So one of our dinosaurs, Terror of the Peak, Blast Furnace Dragon, you name it. We sack the egg, we save the creature, and then the egg trigger happens on the Atla, and value. Next up, we have Garruk's Uprising, 2 and a green. If it enters the battlefield while there's a creature with power 4 or greater on the table, that you control, you get to draw a card. Creatures you control have trample, and whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you get to draw a card. We're going to see that trigger a lot. Plus, the trample thing is, like I said, we have issues with trample. We need to make sure we have trample, because your opponents will chump block for days. We got Growing Ranks for 2 and hybrid green-white. At the beginning of your upkeep, you get to populate. It's an enchantment that just lets you populate. So you put out the egg with Atla, and then you just keep populating those eggs. Plus, Atla is probably making eggs. Plus, Nesting Dragon's probably making eggs. Plus, Determined Iteration is making eggs. You make an army of eggs, and you board wipe, and suddenly your opponents are in a really bad situation because, if you play it really conservatively and you just make eggs for the next couple of turns with Atla online, and then you play the Blasphemous Act, all of a sudden it's a one-sided board wipe because you get a whole bunch of beaters in exchange for a whole bunch of 0/1s, and your opponents have nothing left on the table, and all of a sudden you become a massive threat. And you can usually end the game pretty quickly from that point on, if not just end the game right then, because you have enough power on the table to do so. It's a really cool idea. Rhythm of the Wild for 1, a red and a green. Creature spells you control can't be countered, which is super important. And non-token creatures you control have Riot. So we could either put a +1/+1 counter on it or give it haste. Let's go with the haste. They don't need +1/+1 counters. Unless, of course, we're talking about that toxic one. No, wait. That wasn't the one. There was one in here that if it got more power, it would be really ridiculous. Next up, we have Smothering Tithe. For obvious reasons, this deck is expensive. Mana value in here is a thing. And so being able to create treasure tokens because your opponents are drawing cards is super important. It really does save the day. It has saved the day on many occasions. Just put it in your deck. It's really good. Next up, we have the Dragon Kami Reborn. This one is funny too. This one's cheeky. You gain 2 life, and look at the top 3 cards of your library. Exile one of them face down with a hatching counter on it, and put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Exile the Saga, then return it to the battlefield under your control. It returns as an egg. Most importantly, a 0/1 egg. Whenever Dragon Kami's egg or a dragon you control dies, you may cast a creature spell from among the cards you own in exile with hatching counters on them without paying its mana cost. So it's another way to cheat in more creatures, but also because this is an egg, and if you have Atla in play, it sees extra value because you'll cheat in 2 creatures. It's kind of funny. I like it. Okay, next up would be the Planeswalker spot. Today we're actually going to be looking at some of the newer cards from March of the Machines. We're going to be looking at battles. So we have Invasion of Ikoria. Invasion of Ikoria is kind of a dumb card to begin with. It's a tutor for creatures. It's basically a Court of Calling with a backside to it. I think it's called Court of Calling. Anyway, for X and 2 green, when an Invasion of Ikoria enters the battlefield, search your library or graveyard for a non-human creature card with mana value X or less, and put it onto the battlefield. If you search your library this way, shuffle. Obviously, I feel like I shouldn't have to say this, but I will. You're not going to look for your big beater dinosaurs unless you absolutely need the answers. You should probably cast this as soon as possible. Probably look for that marauding raptor or one of the eggs or something like that, because really you want to cheat in your other big creatures. It has 6, I guess, siege counters on it. I don't know what they call the counters for this. So if you deal 6 damage to it, it transforms into a dinosaur that is disgusting. It becomes Zalortha, Apex of Ikoria, which is an 8/8 reach, and then for each non-human creature you control, you may have that creature assign its combat damage as though it weren't blocked. So it's still going to be blocked. You know, it's still going to take damage from being blocked, but then it's just going to assign its damage as though it wasn't blocked. That's a lot of damage for your opponents to take. And it's a dinosaur, so it's really on theme. I love it. Anyway, yeah, that's Invasion of Ikoria. Super good card for this. There is supposed to be a Planeswalker in here. I want to put in one of the Hotleys, but the Hotleys are kind of bad in general. But, eventually maybe you'll see an iteration with Hotley. Next up, we're going to look at non-basic lands. So we've got ourselves a Battlefield Forge, which is pain land for red-white. We've got Boseija, who endures. You can channel that to destroy, what is it? Artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land. So powerful. They get to replace it with a basic land, but the point is, like, you can hit one of those non-basic lands that are really problematic for you. Maybe they have a Maze of Ith, and you need to get rid of it. I don't know. Enchantment, artifact, destruction, super good, especially considering this is likely going to be cast for 1 green if you channel it. Otherwise, it's just a forest. We got Canopy Vista. This is a check land for green-white that counts as both a forest plains. We got Cinderglade, a check land for red-green that counts as both a mountain forest. We've got Clifftop Retreat that is a check land for red-white. We've got Command Tower, for obvious reasons. Exotic Orchard, again, you're playing 3 colors. Your opponents are likely to be playing at least 1. Evolving Wilds, you can sack to search for basics. High Market is a sack outlet again. You can tap it, sack a creature to gain a life. You gain a life, you sack an egg, and you get value out of the egg. Really cool. Otherwise, it taps for colorless. Jetmir's Garden, Triome that counts as a mountain forest plains, also cycles for 3. We got Jungle Shrine, another Triome that taps for red, green, white, but doesn't count for land types. We got Overgrown Farmland, check land for green, white. Got Razor Verge Thicket. This is a fast land, if I remember correctly. Yeah, fast land for green, white. We got Rockfall Vale, check land for red, green. Is it check land? Yeah, check land. Rootbound Crag, another check land for red-green. We got Stomping Grounds. This is a shock land for red-green. Counts as both mountain forest. We got Sundown Pass, another check land for red-white. We got Temple Garden, a shock land for green-white. Counts as a forest plains. And then we got Terramorphic Expanse. You can sack it for a basic land. And then finally, we got our basic lands. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 forests. We got 1, 2, 3, 4 mountains. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plains. So that is our Atla Palani deck. Like I said, the whole point of this, originally when I built it, it was just really, really consistent. It was, I almost guarantee I would become the threat within a couple of turns of getting Atla online and things start rolling. And it was almost impossible to do anything about. Once you got the Avacyn in play, it got really crazy. Gisela being in play meant that you were taking less damage. So was your permanents. Your opponents were taking more damage. So it got really kind of crazy. Turning it into this, it's still crazy, but it's something that I think my opponents actually have easier time dealing with. More importantly, what the whole point, like I mentioned multiple times in here, is to create a grindy game. I want my opponents to really run out of answers, because that is going to be the only way that you, as a player playing this deck, are going to actually win. You have to force your opponents to play all their removal, force them to run out of answers, and force them into a desperate situation, and then just swing in for game at that point. It's intense, but there is ways to beat it. And I do say that when I did change it, the consistency went down a bit. The amount of crazy creatures that were hitting the table were a lot easier to deal with, and the win consistency also went down a bit, which was more. It made it so that people actually were okay with playing it, first off, and secondly, it was more in line with the decks that I play against on a consistent basis. Obviously, if you want to play Atla Palani in a much higher echelon, just throw in all those horrible, stupid beaters that everybody freaking hates. Super good card, super good deck, super fun to play. This was really fun to play. I haven't had this much fun playing a deck in a very long time. A lot of them, they feel grindy and it feels kind of bad to play. This was not one of those. I enjoy this deck. Anyway, that is it for Atla Palani Nest Tender. If you have any questions or comments, leave those down below. But keep it positive. I will be removing any negative comments because we just don't need those. And guys, until next time, peace.